I'm Rebecca Tadokera, as you might have heard, and I'm a scientist and specialize in immunology, in particular at the University of Cape Town. And I'm a senior researcher at Stellenbosch University right now. So, to tell you a little bit of my journey of how I started and how I ended up where I am today. So, spoiler alert, I never set out to be an immunologist or even a scientist for that matter. And growing up in the streets of Harare, I had no idea at all what I would become or that I would be a scientist, because I didn't know any scientists to look up to. And so, for that reason, I feel like that's one of the reasons why I love science communication, because I just feel scientists need to be a bit more visible. But I can tell you a bit more. I'll come back to that point. And now, coming back to how I ended up where I am right now, I'll tell you a little bit of a story. So, on my first day of high school, I remember having this teacher. She was a short lady, absolute dynamite, and she gave us an introduction to science. This is first day of high school, and she defined to me what a scientist was, and her definition was: scientists are men and women who look at the world around them and try to discover things about this world, both the living things and the non-living things. And those words have stuck with me. I think that was kind of like the hook that I needed for me to just stay in science. And looking back, I realized that that's probably where my passion for just science in general and my curiosity was sparked. So fast forwarding now, a few more years later, when I was in university and I was at this conference, I was attending a conference actually at the Victoria Falls. I remember that very well. And back then, pre-corona, when conferences were still face-to-face gatherings, remember that? Those days. Yeah, it seems like a long time ago now. But anyway, that is when my career started as an immunologist. I was introduced by another mentor of mine. Her name is Liz Corbett, and she introduced me to Rob Wilkinson, who then was going to be my mentor or supervisor. I didn't know then, and he did such brilliant presentation on what he presented on TB and TB immunology, and I was just hooked onto the subject from then on. And so that's how I started my career as an immunologist. And so I did a PhD in immunology, and my specialization has always been on TB, how the TB bacteria affects the immune system and how we respond to that. As you know, TB is one of the biggest problems we have here in Africa and in South Africa as well. So yeah, I think that's how I would say my journey as an immunologist, as a scientist, started. And coming back to the point where I said that scientists need to be more visible, because I didn't see any scientists growing up, and I feel like even now there's still a lot of children out there who don't know what a scientist looks like, or who don't know anyone who is a scientist. I mean, I know this study that's been going on over 50 years now, and when kids are asked to draw a scientist, more often than not, they would draw a white male, because that is their idea or imagination of a scientist. And so I feel that scientists need to be more visible, because the next generation needs to know that anyone can be a scientist. A poor little black girl in Kailichi can be a scientist. And so can be a girl or a boy in Constantia or wherever else in the world, So yeah, that's what I'll say has been my journey so far, and love what I do. If I can give an example of COVID, I mean, everything is COVID these days now, right? So I would say that COVID has come to the forefront. It has overtaken everything else. But at the same time, I think one of the benefits that has come with that is people are a lot more scientifically literate. I mean, people now know what an immune system is, what a vaccine does. Even my 7-year-old can tell you how a vaccine works. So I feel like COVID has kind of made everybody generally aware of science and immunology in particular. But coming back specifically to TB, and I'll refer to TB and maybe HIV because those are the diseases that have plagued us as Africans for the longest time. And for the simple reason that we have not been able to make as much advances or progress in terms of research. I mean, COVID, there's been such immense resources and collaboration going on into COVID. And that is why they were able to come up with vaccines, several vaccines for that within less than a year. But with TB and HIV, for example, we are still lagging behind. We have made some progress, and I can give an example of the South African TB initiative. It's SATV, basically at UCT. It's a big organization that has been at the forefront of researching TB vaccines. And you know, vaccines, you talk about vaccines, you talk about immunology. And SATV has been one of those institutions or groups that has been at the forefront of trying to get us ahead and get a better understanding of TB immunology. And that work has included testing new candidate vaccines, because for TB, you'll be surprised to know that there is one vaccine, which is called BCG, and we've had the same vaccine for over 100 years now, and we have more than 16 vaccines right now for COVID. So you can see just how much we are lagging behind in terms of progress and research in that area. But I'll say that I applaud organizations like SATV. They've made immense progress. We have not managed to get new vaccines, but we've definitely got a better understanding of how TB affects the body, and also other tests that are coming up that like biomarkers, for example, because you know, for us to diagnose TB, it takes a long time before you can detect TB for certain in a person. It can take up to 6 weeks. But people like Tom Scriber at SATV have been working on biomarkers to try and diagnose TB better, to try and find better biomarkers for us to be able to fight TB better. And I think there's a lot of work as well that is going into HIV research, and Wits University is at the forefront of that kind of work, and so is KRIF. A lot of the HIV immunology that's been out there, the data that's been outdated, a lot of it has come from Africa and South Africa in particular. So that's a very tricky question. I'll tell you why in a moment. Because in terms of, while I've mentioned that there's organizations and groups like SATV, like Wits Health Research Institute, that have made progress in the world of infectious diseases and infectious diseases immunology, at the same time, our capacity to do immunology work here in Africa still remains very limited, and mainly for two reasons, in my opinion. Because immunological research and most basic research tends to be very expensive, and a lot of times our countries and our governments are not very willing to put in money into this kind of research, because it takes long before you can actually have the results of what it is that you are working on. For example, the mRNA vaccines that we've got now for COVID, it has taken years. That technology has been in development for a very long time. So sometimes for us, we have more immediate problems than trying to research things that will give us results that we can only take to the clinic 10 years later. So I feel like that's been a bit of a setback for how much progress and contribution we can make in Africa to with regards to immunology and to infectious diseases just in general. We have definitely contributed with the help of collaborations and also just capacities building right now. And I think there's more realization that we need to invest into research. We know we have philanthropists now investing into research capacity building in South Africa. So I feel like we might not have made as much progress or as much contribution, but I think the tide is turning and we are likely to see a lot more advances coming out of Africa. I mean, we know like BioVac, for example, and a few other like Afrigen, a few other organizations are now trying to manufacture vaccines, COVID vaccines, and who knows, vaccines for other diseases as well here in South Africa, for the African continent. So I think Africa is rising. I would say that, so communication, I would just want to zero in on the word communication. And communication, from by its basic definition, is a two-way street. It's you talk, I listen and you talk, you know. It's two-way traffic, and it's not just about me as a scientist telling you what to do, or you know, it's about engagement. And so I feel that sometimes we as scientists seem to think that we know it all. I've studied for I don't know how many years doing my PhD, and I know my subject inside out, and so I'm the expert on this subject. But at the same time, I feel like there's also room for engaging, not just telling people, but also just listening to what people out there have to say as well. And even especially, I think this becomes very important, especially when I do like social science research, operational research, because you need the communities to be involved. So you need to communicate, you need to be on the same page. So I think this applies even for basic research, basic science research as well. We need to communicate, and we need to take back the results and the findings of the work that we've done to the communities, because at the end of the day, science is meant to advance society in some way. And so I feel like society is that we as scientists have an obligation and a duty to communicate our science to the people who fund this work, because most of the science anyway is publicly funded. It's funded from taxpayers' money. So I feel like we have a duty as scientists to communicate and to engage with the public on issues surrounding science, because at the end of the day, science affects our day-to-day lives. Good question. So I must say, Science Demystified, for me, came out of a moral responsibility to step into the gap and to share some credible science, like from a credible source. Because for the longest time, I've been sometimes one person to just bury my head in the sand, and I'm like, okay, fine. I'm a scientist, I'll just do my science in the lab and publish in a journal, and that's it. But then I realized, especially and I think that is true for a lot of scientists, who just think being a scientist means just doing my work, getting it published, getting my name first author or second author or whatever it is. But I feel that there is more. We have a bigger obligation than that, because knowledge is power. So if you are knowledgeable, you are in a position of power of some sort. And so with the COVID pandemic, for me, it just made that stark contrast very clear, because some things I take for granted because I know these things and they are second nature to me. But for a lot of people, understanding how does a vaccine even work, you know, it's something that they don't understand. And why how does even the coronavirus mutate? What happens? You know, it's not something that everybody can understand. And so I realized that, look, I'm in this privileged space of being so knowledgeable and having so much information at my fingertips. I have a responsibility to share this information with people around me. And I just started doing this within my networks, within my social circles, WhatsApp groups, and just saying, hey guys, I'm here. If you want to ask any questions related to COVID, related to vaccines, anything, I'm available. I'm here. I'm at your service. Ask me anything. And so that's how I started just putting myself out there to just help and to just fill in the information gap, because as much as there's a lot of information out there, I feel that like there's also a hunger for real and incredible information, because there's so much misinformation, and sometimes it's hard for people to sift through the information to find what is true and what is not. And so that's where I come in with Science Demystified, and also just helping to demystify some of the myths. I've started with COVID, but I see this work going beyond COVID and looking at all of the other science myths or the other health conditions as well. And so I'm building to that. I'm building the Science Demystified brand to work towards that. It's daunting, I think, to put yourself out there, and I would say that that's probably why a lot of people don't do it, because you are putting, when you go onto social media and when you speak on social media, you are taking on a responsibility, and you are also opening yourself up. I think it's a very vulnerable space to be in, and so for that reason you actually have to have some courage and to anticipate, to say, look, whatever happens, I'm just going to speak up anyway. Because for me, on social media, I'm one of those people who for the longest time was just hovering around on the edges, just checking out what other people have to say, consuming other people's content, but not being bold enough or courageous enough to actually share or to create content of my own. So I'll say that it takes a leap of faith to just jump out and put yourself out there and open yourself out to say, look, I'm here and I'm going to talk about my science because that's what I know. So that's act of being courageous. I think that's one challenge. And then a second challenge I would highlight is that with social media, you are pretty much speaking into a void, into an empty space, just like I'm doing right now. I'm just speaking into my phone. And you don't always know whether somebody is watching or somebody is reading your posts or things like that. So sometimes it can be kind of discouraging, because you'll be like, I'm putting all this effort. Is anyone really paying attention? Because you can't engage, you can't see people's faces, you can't see people's reactions. And so that also is another challenge. But how one can overcome, or rather I'll say how I've been able to keep going, is sometimes you meet one person or a person who responds to your post and they'll say, oh yeah, thank you for that, thank you for sharing that, I didn't know, or ask another question, follow-up question. It doesn't happen very often, because sometimes people just consume and they move on. There's so much to consume out there and they just move on. But occasionally when you get that engagement, when you get those questions, it's encouraging, and it helps you to realize that, you know what, maybe people might not say something, but I'm sure somebody is listening. Even if it's 1%, somebody's paying attention. I think that's the second challenge. And maybe the last challenge that I would say with social media is just navigating the different platforms, because there's so many different platforms. There's TikTok, there's Instagram, there's LinkedIn, there's Facebook, all of there's YouTube, there's WhatsApp even. All of those different platforms sometimes require just a different way of packaging and creating your content just in a different way to cater for the different audiences. Because somebody who is on Instagram just wants to see a quick picture, on YouTube they want to see you speak, they want a video, and maybe somebody wants to, on other platforms, people want to, on LinkedIn, people want to read. It's a different audience, maybe a more intellectual audience. So I think just navigating the different platforms and trying to tailor the content for each one of those audiences, I feel that's been one of the challenges that I've had to navigate, and I'm still doing that. I'm still working on it. Yeah. I mean, I'm still new, relatively new as a science communicator. My journey as a science communicator is still pretty much in early days. And obviously, coming in as an outsider, sometimes you actually do see how things can be done differently or how things can be done better. And yeah, I would say there's a few things that I've thought about. One thing, for example, I definitely think that there's need for, maybe this is not just for science communication in general, but I feel like there's actually need for science communication 101 module in graduate school or in universities, for example, because I feel like there's need for everybody who is coming out of university with a STEM degree. They should be able to speak to the public about they should be able to engage the public about their work, about their research, So I feel like that could be having something like that could be a big bridge to just narrow the gap between science and society, because it doesn't have to be that wide a gap, So I think that could help just in closing up the gap and having people who are scientists who are a lot more socially aware and can engage with the public. So maybe that's one of the things I would say, and maybe this is not for maybe more for policymakers or educators or things like that, but not necessarily for the science communicators themselves. And then I also feel that sometimes we can be a bit alienating as scientists as well. So I feel oftentimes I think we just need to engage with the public and to realize that people may not be scientifically trained, but they're intelligent, they're smart people. So we do need to just be willing to engage with people appropriately and to realize that people are knowledgeable. They are not as clueless as we would like to think. So I think just coming from that angle as well, and then tailoring our material or content for the different audiences appropriately, I feel could be one way to improve science communication. And then lastly, I think collaboration between the different science communicators would definitely be something that could just move the science communication agenda forward even better. For example, just this collaboration between Circular Digital and Science Demystified. This is a collaboration between science communicators, and I feel like the more we collaborate, the more we can reach and different audiences and to just get the messaging out there. And you get the messaging in different ways, in different contexts, and it just amplifies the voice. It just amplifies the science really. And just the last point I think is that also just to be honest, as scientists, sometimes we don't want to appear like we don't know something, and I think that it's important to be honest as scientists to say, look, this we know, this we are still doing, this we are still researching, but this we don't know. I don't think there's any shame in that, and I don't think anyone expects perfection, because it's still a journey of learning, and science is not perfect. We're trying to find the answers, but it's still a long way before we can even get to giving all the answers, for example, with COVID. And so I feel like being honest, and for me in my communications, oftentimes I'll say, look, we know that this vaccine is safe, but we don't know, for example, the long-term effects or things like that. We are still working on that. We are still investigating that. And just being honest like that, I think, gives you a bit more credibility as a scientist than just pretending that you know everything. So yeah, I think those would be my take-home messages really on what we can do better as science communicators.